It's time for another sit down video. I feel like I haven't done one of these in a while. And it's time to chat about some of the books that I've read in the last little bit. And it's actually been quite a few months, I think over 6 months since I did the last astrology book video. So I'm happy to let you know that I have 6 more books to share with you. We'll take the same approach today that we did in my previous astrology books video, which was published last year. And we're going to talk about each of the books using 3 pieces of criteria. First, we're going to talk about the level of knowledge that you need to read that book. From beginner, somebody that's just learning astrology, to intermediate, and of course, an advanced student of astrology. Second, we're going to address the readability of the book. Is it a light read, something you can read as you're going to bed, or something that requires a lot of concentration and a lot of brain power? And finally, we'll have a chat about what the book is about, the content. Let's go ahead and start with the first book. The first book, which I actually do not have a physical copy of because I read the online version or the ebook. The first book is The Book of Pluto by Stephen Forrest. And if you watched my previous astrology books video, then you would know that I really love Stephen Forrest. The way he writes is very clear and very understandable. In terms of the level of knowledge that you need to read The Book of Pluto, I would say this is best for somebody that's an intermediate level of astrology knowledge. You do need to know the basics of houses, the basics of planets and signs, because this book really goes under the assumption that you know all of that, and it applies all of those concepts on the planet Pluto. As I already shared, it's written by Stephen Forrest, so the readability is amazing, chef's kiss. So this is definitely a book that you can read right before you're going to bed, even though the content might be a bit heavy. And talking about content, the Book of Pluto is all about the planet Pluto. What does it symbolize? How does it work in all of the 12 zodiacs? How does it work in all of the 12 houses? And at the end, he even gives examples of people's charts. Next up, we have The Endless Sky, also by Stephen Forrest. This book, I would say, is also for an intermediate astrologer, because it's a collection of some of Stephen Forrest's newsletters or random writings here and there. And some of them do address quite complex topics. So if you don't have the basic understanding of astrology, some of these will be a bit difficult to understand. Again, it's written by Stephen Forrest, so the readability is amazing. And what I love about the content of this book is that they're all really small little snippets, small chapters that are maybe 5 to 7 pages long. So you can really just flip to a random chapter and read that while you're having your morning coffee. Or if you're wondering about a certain topic and whether he has addressed it, you can go through the table of contents at the beginning and see if perhaps Stephen has written something interesting on that topic. Overall, I would say if you're somebody that has just learned of Stephen Forrest and you're in love with his writing as much as I am, but perhaps haven't followed his writings for years and years, it's the amazing opportunity to tap into his wealth of knowledge and all of the things that he shared throughout the years. All right, I promise you the rest of the books, the 4 books we have left, are not from Stephen Forrest, so don't worry. Next up, we have Under One Sky by Rafael Nasser. Under One Sky is super interesting content-wise. It works on the premise that 12 astrologers are given a random person's birth chart, and they're asked to do a reading, a written reading to be exact. And this book basically takes a look at all of these different 12 astrologers, which, by the way, practice different types of astrology, different traditions of astrology, and takes a look at how they differ. I feel like the concept for this book was a lot better than the execution. And what I mean by that is I love this idea of giving the birth chart to 12 different astrologers and seeing the difference. And he also lets the persons whose chart these astrologers are looking at tell her life story at the beginning as well. And that's also really interesting to look at what she shared, look at the readings, and see the correlations. However, the execution fell a little bit for me at the beginning. There is a huge part of the book where the astrologers are asked a lot of questions, and a lot of questions about quite philosophical things, quite philosophical questions on determinism and astrology and soul versus body. And that did get a bit long and dry for me personally. And I just wished, like, okay, I get what Rafael was trying to do here, trying to really show us how each of the astrologers thinks about a certain topic. But it just felt like it was way too long until we actually got to what we purchased this book for. I also wonder if he could have perhaps structured each astrologer by giving a profile on them, followed by their reading, whereas what he did instead is the whole first part was just question all 12 answers from the 12 astrologers. Another philosophical question, all 12 answers from 12 astrologers. Another philosophical questions, and on and on and on. And yeah, it just felt a bit boring and a bit difficult. Another thing, some of the readings are also quite difficult to understand. Some astrologers did a really wonderful job because they really worded everything as an actual reading, talking in everyday language in a way that somebody that has no idea about astrology would still understand it. Whereas some astrologers, they focus their readings so much on how they got to a certain interpretation and a lot of astrological knowledge as well. So my feelings overall are quite mixed about this book. In terms of who should read this, I do think that you need to be intermediate, maybe even an advanced student to read this, because you get exposed to a lot of different traditions of astrology, a lot of different types of astrology. And I think for somebody that's beginner or intermediate, it can be quite difficult. And in terms of readability, it depends. Some parts of it are quite easy to read, and some parts are quite difficult and require a lot of focus. Next up, we have The Nature of Astrology by Bruce Scofield. Scofield? I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Bruce. I was actually very surprised. I just stumbled upon this book at a random bookstore. Okay, it wasn't random. A big chain bookstore in Canada when I was visiting my family. And I was quite curious. I was really curious that this book sounded like it was more of the scientific approach. It talked about more of the practice of astrology rather than, okay, this is how you do astrology. So I was very excited when I found this book. I would say this book is, I don't know, I feel like beginners could also read it. I think Bruce does really well to explain certain astrology topics, even if you don't know about them already. And this is because he wrote this book as a sort of scientific dissertation for his PhD, if I remember correctly. So he really wrote it in the sense that a fellow colleague at the university will read this and not have any knowledge of astrology, but should still be able to understand it. So in that sense, if you're a beginner, you can definitely read it. Do keep in mind that this was a dissertation, or at least the way I understood it, this was a dissertation. And you can definitely see that when you're reading it. It's written in quite an academic way. A lot of times it can take a lot of focus to understand what Bruce is saying. Some of the things are quite specific or approached in quite a scientific way. So just be prepared for that if you pick this book up. But overall, content-wise, it was super unique. I think content-wise, Bruce really approaches astrology from the level of, hey, what effect do the planets have on Earth, on nature, on what he calls self-organizing systems? And it's super interesting to see him approach it from that perspective, whereas all the other books focus on the effects the planets have on us as humans. Next up, we have The Guide to Horoscope Interpretation by Marc Edmund Jones. This book is quite old. I think I was looking at the front, and it was something like 1941 that this book was written. If I'm reading that correctly. So it was written a long time ago. This was a book that I was also really excited to read, and this is because this book approaches patterns in the birth chart, and by that I mean patterns of how the planets are positioned. So if you have a pattern in a horoscope or in a birth chart where all of the planets are at the bottom and the top is empty, that's one specific type. And Marc in this book explains it. And he goes through all of the types and explains what each of them mean. He gives a lot of examples with actual birth charts as well. And one thing that I was really surprised towards the end of this book is he also talks about these things called lines. I've never heard of this before. And he addresses, for example, the line of vitality, the line of, I think, personality, the line of culture, efficiency. And each of them are composed of 2 planets. And he then goes into explaining the relationship between those 2 planets. Are they in a conjunction, in a square, opposition, and what effect that also has on somebody's chart. So in a way, that extra addition of the lines that I wasn't expecting at the end was a really nice addition. It almost felt like a little bonus that I didn't expect to get from the book. And who doesn't love a little bonus? Who doesn't love to feel like they got free stuff? If we are to go ahead with our criteria, I would say this book is for an intermediate student of astrology. Again, you need to know the basics to be able to read this book. And I would say that the readability requires a lot of focus. This was written in 1941. There's a lot of old English in here. I mean, he calls the people in this book prophets. So already that was a bit strange. But some of the descriptions that he gives, many of the times I had to stop and reread the sentence, and I had to really contemplate what he meant with it. So just keep that in mind if you're going to pick this one up. But otherwise, I would say the content, especially the patterns in the birth chart, are definitely something useful for you to know if you are a student of astrology. I'm just realizing that only one of these books is for beginners, which is going to be this next one. So if you are a little bit disappointed right now and you're thinking, okay, but I'm a beginner and I want some beginner recommendations, then do watch this video right here. That has a couple of more beginner books examples for you. But I do have one beginner book in this video. Okay, this is the Library of Esoterica Astrology book. So the Library of Esoterica published a whole series of books on tarot, I believe was one of them. Astrology is another one of them. And wow, This is an amazing book. First of all, this is a coffee table book. So inside there are more pictures than words. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I think this is what makes it perfect for beginners. This book is structured in such a way that you get to understand each of the zodiac signs and each of the planets, which is something that a beginner is learning about. And it also gives a lot of examples of art through the years, where each of that planet is shown, or each of that zodiac sign is shown. So it's really a beautiful way to learn about astrology. And sometimes what I also do is I flip to a random page and I leave it open like that on my coffee table. And it's really beautiful to sort of be graced with such amazing imagery when I walk by. In terms of the readability, this is very easy to read. Each of the descriptions for the planets and the zodiac signs are only a page long. Good to keep in mind is at the beginning of the book, there's also a history of astrology. So if you're interested in how the practice got started and where it came from, this is also a part of it as well. So that was it. Those were the 6 book recommendations from my end, or I should say these are the 6 that I have read in the last couple of months. And then I just shared my honest thoughts with you. Some of these books, I'm not sure if I would go back and reread again. I think especially Under One Sky by Rafael Nasser. I don't think I would reread that one. But I would say for the rest that yes, they are legitimate recommendations from me. And if you are a student of astrology or just a lover of astrology, then I would definitely recommend the 5 that are left over. Thank you so much for joining me. I also wanted to let you know that if you just stumbled across me randomly or across this video, I also produce monthly horoscopes. So if you're somebody that's curious what March has in store for you, then go ahead and check out the rest of my channel. And make sure you subscribe because I'm also going to have the April forecasts coming very soon. And let me know down in the comments if you have any book recommendations for me. My reading list is already quite long, but you know, we can always add 1 or 2 more books in there. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.